been discussed very much. There have been cases of it. The medical profession is extremely conservative on this issue, but there may be cases based upon particular situations where we would look more favorably on that. But here again, I think there's no agreement on the part of the Christian community.
Okay, before I turn to the Muslim side for the last time, those opinions that you just project to me are biblical or personal?
I'm expressing personal opinions. They're not.
Do you think the Bible?
I think they are shaped by, biblical viewpoints.
Okay. So do you think the Bible allows homosexuality?
The Bible certainly does not condone homosexuality, but I think when we look at the message of the Scriptures in the context of today's culture, we may look at it differently than it was looked at in the days of St. Paul and St. Peter.
Yeah, and also I have to add, because it would be a little bit different, I think, for Catholic and perhaps also, perhaps not on this issue, but for Orthodox Christians in general, and that is both Catholic and Orthodox Christians do recognize what they call tradition as a kind of a source of revelation, an ongoing, over and above, beyond the Scriptures. So it isn't the Scriptures. The Scriptures aren't absolutely the final and decisive word on everything. There's a development that grows out of that in the context of the Church that we believe in too. And I think some would see that changed notions in some of these areas depend on that kind of greater awareness now within the Church of new possibilities and new understandings.
Okay. Before I go to the Muslim side, this is inshallah what's going to happen. We get into the Muslim side. You're going to reply to this point about the human right, the freedom of speech, homosexuality, ending your own life. And then I'll give the final word to the Christian side if they want to reply to what the points Muslims are going to raise, and we'll go on with the other. Please go on. But do me a favor, make it brief as much as you can, please. Thank you.
On the issue of the freedom of speech, definitely you can find, and that's my intention, you can find more elaboration of the opinion recorded in any text against what the text professes, as much as you can find in the Quran itself. The Quran has included not only claims against the Quran itself, but also gave the argument of the person forwarding those claims. If that is the only way that Islam expresses how important the freedom of speech is, then that should be very good enough. But also it goes beyond that. The Quran recorded in verses through which Muslims worship God today claims against the Prophet himself, calling him a liar, a magician, inventor, and so on and so forth. And these verses are recorded, and we recite them in our prayers as part of our worship to God, because they are lessons for us. They resemble the maximum tolerance that Islam gives for the opinion of the other, even if it constitutes slander against the Prophet himself. Not only that, but the Quran recorded slandered the wives of the Prophet, which is the strongest accusation you can throw at anybody. That was recorded with the clearance of the claimant and the refute against those claims with evidence and everything. So the Quran as a text provided, if you will, the context of what the freedom of speech is all about. It is about the human expression of one's own opinion, one's own motive will be then discovered through that opinion, and it can be analyzed and answered. But the Quran encouraged, as I said in the beginning, and commanded dialogue between themselves and between others. That is also not only a condolence of the freedom of speech, but an encouragement and an order. Of course,
Sir, let me remind you just very quick. I'm sorry, I thought that you are finished with this point, but let me remind you that this attitude was not implemented in the masses. I'm not speaking of governance here, I'm talking about the Islamic masses reaction to the book of satanic verses. That was not the case. The masses wanted that man head speech on.
Well, let us talk about, we'll come to the restrictions of how far one can and should go. Because there are some restrictions, otherwise, as Dr. Schuller said, it would have been an open season for anybody to say anything, and then people will be living in quite a chaotic freedom of speech. I will come to the restrictions. The Quran says that there is a rule. Had it not been for Allah pushing people by each other, as Dr. Badawi cited, churches, synagogues, and mosques would have been demolished, which means the freedom of worship is contingent of people pushing each other to what is righteous, to what is good, by teaching and preaching what they believe, and letting the space and the room for others to answer and give their opinion. Also, Islam not only commanded, but rewarded for enjoining what is good by guiding against it and commanding against it. In the practice, the Prophet ﷺ, as Dr. Badawi said before, has welcomed a Christian delegation coming from Yemen to discuss their own religion inside the mosque. That is a profound basis and foundation for any Muslim ruler or religious person or leader to welcome any criticism, so long as it is within the reason, within respect to each other. Then let us come to some restrictions, but before that, also in the practice you find a woman standing in front of Umar ibn Khattab, the second caliph of the Prophet, correcting his understanding of one of the jurisprudence issues, and then he comes across and says, the woman is correct and Umar is wrong. When he dressed a longer dress because he was taller than anybody else, and they used to divide a portion of clothes for every person equally, then somebody stood up and said, we can't obey, we can't listen to you. He said, why? He said, because you are dressing longer than anybody of us. And where did you get the extra piece of clothes? Then he had his own son explain the situation, that his own son donated that piece to him to make his own jilbab or his own robe. So the freedom of speech has always been nourished under the Islamic rule when it is implemented by people who are really righteous and their motive and foundation for rule is Islam. Some restrictions. Islam, though allows you to say anything, but restricts one from profanity, from vulgarity, from lying, from accusation without proof, from giving a false testimony, and from bad-mouthing God, from name-calling each other, irrespective of the background. So all of these are restrictions. Otherwise, the freedom of speech will end up being a chaos. I would leave then Dr. Badawi to make his comments on the rest of the issues.
Just a couple of remarks, additional remarks on freedom of expression, that actually if you look into laws, even in secular societies today, you find that, for example, you're not allowed to use the claim of freedom of expression to promote child pornography, for example. There have been lots of people who have been raising issues about violence on TV, films that shows rape with violence, and they claim that actually it does influence the mentality of the children, and sometimes they mimic what they see. So the idea that some people have that freedom of expression is anything, like you said, anywhere, under any circumstances, I think even within secular society is not an acceptable principle. For example, the question of speaking in a way that is very deeply injurious to the religious sentiments of people. Even in Britain, you have the law of blasphemy. I'm not saying necessarily it's the best law, but even then they refused to apply that law when it came to Muslims, even though a Muslim approach would be that any attack on any religious community in such low way as Rushdie did, for example, is something that should not be regarded as part and parcel of the... Again, in Canada, for example, You cannot, we have a law against hate literature. You cannot say it is my freedom of expression, start making racial slurs against Jews